Welcome to the deep dive. If you're revising for your IB history exams or, just trying to get your head around one of the biggest geopolitical shifts of the 20th century, then you are definitely in the right place. Today, we are really focusing in on how and why the Kuomintang, the GMD, took control of Taiwan, and specifically the violent consolidation that happened between 1945 and 1949.
Yeah, and our mission here isn't just to give you a timeline of events.
No, not at all.
We want to dig into the strategy behind it all. We're going to distill that history from the GMD's first arrival after World War II right through the absolute brutality of the 228 incident and what came after.
Exactly. We want to understand those key moments, those transition points that lock the island down as their final indispensable base.
And this period is it's non-negotiable for understanding the whole story. As we unpack this, you need to remember that you're watching two timelines collide.
Two timelines, right?
On the one hand, you have the total collapse of the GMD on the mainland during the Chinese Civil War. And at the exact same time, you have this calculated, frankly brutal establishment of a military government just 100 miles offshore.
So understanding this takeover is the foundation for everything that comes next.
It really is. It's the origin story of the modern KMT state.
Okay, let's get into it. Now, before we even get to the GMD arriving in force, let's set the scene with some basic geography and history. Where exactly is Taiwan, and how did it become Chinese territory again right before all this kicked off?
So physically, it's a pretty large and very strategic island. It's about 240 miles long, maybe 98 miles wide at its widest point, and it sits right across the Taiwan Strait from the mainland.
It was known as Formosa back then, right?
That's right, Formosa. And historically, it had been ceded to Imperial Japan way back in 1895.
After the first Sino-Japanese War.
Exactly. So for 50 years, a full half-century, Taiwan developed under Japanese administration. This meant it had a completely different social and economic structure from the total chaos that was happening on the Chinese mainland.
That's such a crucial point. 50 years is a long time.
It's a lifetime. It means that when the GMD finally shows up in 1945, they aren't walking into a familiar province that's happy to see them. They're entering a society that has its own unique culture, its own political expectations.
And the decision to hand it back to China, that wasn't a local decision.
Not at all. It was decided internationally at the Cairo Declaration in 1943. That's where the Allied powers agreed that after Japan's defeat, Taiwan would be restored to China. The formal handover happened in late 1945.
So the GMD arrived as the internationally recognized government.
Yes, but they were walking into a place they didn't really understand, a total unknown.
And what's really fascinating here is that the final mass evacuation in 1949, it wasn't some last-minute panicked retreat. The sources are pretty clear that Chiang Kai-shek was preparing Taiwan as a refuge years ahead of time.
No, absolutely.
So what was happening on the mainland that forced him to turn this island into his strategic life raft?
Well, by late 1948, the writing was on the wall. The CCP was winning decisive victories in the Civil War, and Jiang knew the mainland was lost. He started treating Taiwan not just as a temporary hideout, but as the new base of operations.
The new center of power.
The new core, yeah. And the collapse on the mainland just sped up. The big one was when Nanjing, the GMD capital, fell to the communists in April 1949. That was the signal that the entire government was about to be destroyed.
But Jiang had already made a very clever political move by then, hadn't he?
He had. And this is a detail that often gets overlooked. He technically resigned as president back in January of 1949. He sort of stepped away from the public failure.
But only on paper.
Only on paper. And here's the key thing, if you're revising this topic. He kept full control of the GMD party, the loyal troops, and most important of all the money, all the financial assets.
The purse strings.
He held the purse strings. So when Nanjing fell, he was still the de facto leader, and he was the one who officially ordered the total evacuation of all his remaining forces.
That is such a vital distinction. He gives up the title, but he keeps the real power.
Yeah.
And speaking of the money, the sheer scale of the assets they moved to Taiwan is it's astounding.
Yeah.
It shows this wasn't temporary.
No way. We're talking about establishing a whole regime in exile, one that could pay its army and fund its operations indefinitely. He took all the remaining military equipment, everything they could get on a ship.
And the gold.
And a truly staggering amount of gold. We're talking about $300 million in gold reserves and foreign currency.
$300 million in 1949.
I mean, think about that. It's an enormous sum. It was basically the entire Chinese national treasury. And this wasn't just cash to spend. This gold was the foundation. It's what allowed the KMT to stabilize the currency on Taiwan and pay for this huge military machine they'd just landed.
Without that gold.
Without that wealth, the regime simply wouldn't have survived. It couldn't have maintained order.
So they moved the army and the treasury to establish stability. But here's the irony, right? Bringing all of that, it leads directly to the next huge problem. The GMD arrives in 45. They're supposed to be liberators from the Japanese, but the relationship with the Taiwanese people just soured almost immediately. Why?
Because the administration that the GMD sent in, led by a governor named Chen Yi, was, well, it was catastrophically bad, inept, and deeply corrupt.
And the Taiwanese people were used to something different.
Exactly. They'd lived under Japanese rule, which was strict, for sure, but it was also pretty efficient. Suddenly, under the GMD, their living standards just plummeted. Corruption was everywhere, infrastructure was neglected, disease started spreading.
And the sources mention a specific grievance with food, with rice.
Yes, that was a huge one. The price of rice just skyrocketed, which caused mass outrage. And the reason was that food was being taken from Taiwan and shipped straight to the mainland to feed the GMD's collapsing armies.
So local families were literally going hungry to feed a losing war somewhere else.
Precisely. And that just cemented this impression that the GMD didn't care about Taiwan or its people, that the island was just a resource base to be stripped bare.
And the local elites? They weren't just sitting back and watching this happen.
Oh, no. The Taiwanese elites, many of them educated during that Japanese period, they started organizing. They formed groups like the Resolution Committee.
Were they pushing for independence at this point?
Not necessarily, not at first. They were pushing for greater self-governance, an end to the corruption. But for the GMD, which was already paranoid from losing the Civil War, any demand for autonomy looked like a threat.
A threat to be crushed.
And that tension just simmered and simmered for over a year until it finally boiled over in 1947.
Which brings us right to the 228 incident. It starts with something seemingly small, right? What was the spark, and how did the GMD's response just guarantee it would explode?
The initial incident was almost trivial. On February 27, 1947, GMD agents confronted a widow selling untaxed cigarettes in Taipei. They pistol whipped her, a crowd gathered, and in the chaos, an agent shot and killed a bystander.
And the administration's response was a media blackout?
The worst possible move. They forbade newspapers from printing the story, which, of course, just poured gasoline on the fire.
It just confirms everyone's worst fears.
It does. So the next day, February 29th, public anger just erupts. Protesters take over a radio station. They broadcast the story across the whole island. And this is a tragic part of the story. They incite violence against mainlanders. Over 1,000 were killed in that initial unrest.
Wow.
And that same day, a huge crowd gathered in Taipei's new park to march on the government offices. The local police panic. They opened fire into the crowd, killing 2 protesters. And that moment, the incident in the square, was the point of no return.
Because it showed the GMD had no regard for their lives.
A total and unforgivable disregard. The mood just shifted instantly from protest to, well, open rebellion.
And that's when the political side kicks in again at the Resolution Committee.
Exactly. They go from being this discussion group to what was essentially a shadow government. They set up branches all over the island, trying to maintain order because everything was in chaos.
But their demands changed.
Their demands got much bigger. They were now demanding significant autonomy from Governor Chen Yi. And for the GMD, looking across the strait at their collapsing world, this organized push for autonomy looked like a full-scale rebellion.
One that needed to be put down immediately.
And with overwhelming force.
Which brings us to the darkest part of this story, the GMD response. If they're losing the mainland, wouldn't it have made more sense to try and win over the local population on Taiwan? Why risk alienating everyone with such brutality?
That is the central question, isn't it? And the cynical answer is that their priority wasn't winning hearts and minds. It was immediate, absolute security.
Securing the base no matter the cost.
No matter the cost. Jiang immediately ordered reinforcements from the mainland. These were war-hardened, brutalized troops. And when they arrived in early March, they just killed it. They began an indiscriminate campaign of suppression in all the major cities. Taipei, Kaohsiung, Keelung.
Who were they targeting?
Anyone suspected of dissent. The educated elites, members of the Resolution Committee, anyone with connections to the old Japanese administration. The worst of it happened between March 12th and May 15th.
The numbers are horrifying. The casualty figures are all over the place, but even the low-end estimates are just staggering. for an island of that size.
They are. The estimates range from maybe 2,000 all the way up to 100,000, which just shows you the scale of the chaos.
Yeah.
But historians today generally accept a figure of somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 Taiwanese killed during that period.
20 or 30,000 people.
It represents a catastrophic loss of an entire generation of the island's leadership, and it wasn't a one-off slaughter.
No, this is what kicks off the White Terror.
It is. We need to be clear about what that means. The White Terror was a sustained period of martial law that lasted all the way until 1987.
Decades.
Decades. Decades of political suppression, no civil liberties, arbitrary arrests, surveillance executions. The violence of 228 set the tone for the next 40 years of GMD rule. Dissent would not be tolerated. Period.
Okay, so we have how the troops arrive, the suppression is immediate and brutal.
Yeah.
But let's really dig into the cold strategy of the why. Why did Jiang and the GMD feel this level of extreme, alienating force was their only option?
We can connect this directly back to what was happening on the mainland. This wasn't random violence. It was, you could say, strategic overkill.
Right.
And it was driven by about 4 key factors.
Okay.
First, you have war fatigue and the view of collaborators. The GMD soldiers who landed on Taiwan were exhausted. They'd been fighting the Japanese for 8 years. They were demoralized. And because Taiwan had been Japanese for 50 years, they saw the Taiwanese people, especially the educated ones, as collaborators with the enemy.
So they weren't seen as fellow countrymen to be liberated.
Not at all. There was this deep distrust, which provided a sort of psychological justification for treating them so harshly. It's much easier to crush collaborators than it is to negotiate with fellow citizens.
So that resentment from the war with Japan gets redirected onto the Taiwanese. Okay, what's the second factor?
The second is security priority. For Jiang, the real war was still the civil war on the mainland. He needed Taiwan locked down instantly, no messy diplomacy, no long negotiations.
Get it done so we can get back to the main fight.
Exactly. And here's some counterintuitive context for you. March 1947 was actually a moment of false hope for the GMD. They'd just captured the communist capital of Yan'an. They were publicly claiming the war was almost won.
Wow. So they were brutalizing their future home because they thought they were about to win back their old one.
That's a great way to put it. Securing their rear flank, Taiwan, was just a quick, brutal necessity before the final push. Speed was more important than anything else.
Okay, that makes a horrible kind of sense. What's number 3?
Number 3 is pure anti-communist zeal. Jiang was absolutely obsessed with destroying any communist agents or sympathizers. He saw the island as the last bastion of his ideology. So any protest, any dissent was automatically seen as communist infiltration.
Which justified any level of response.
Any level. And that leads right into the final and maybe the most cynical reason, scapegoating.
How so?
Well, the reality is that communist influence in the 228 uprising was actually very, very limited. But Governor Chen Yi, the guy whose corrupt administration caused the whole mess, he deliberately told Jiang that communists were the ones to blame.
To save his own skin.
Of course. It shifted the blame away from his own failures and mismanagement. And that narrative fed right into Jiang's anti-communist paranoia, ensuring the crackdown wasn't just violent, but ideologically required.
So we've laid out a pretty calculated and cold-blooded strategy. We've got the strategic retreat, the resentment building up from corruption, and then this explosive violence of the White Terror used to just lock the island down. It's a very fast, very dark story of a regime ensuring its own survival.
It is. And the key takeaway here is that this violent consolidation of control in 47 set the permanent, brutal tone for the GMD's rule for the next half-century. It established the power dynamic, mainlanders in charge, local subjugated, and it created this incredibly painful historical memory that, to this day, defines the 228 incident as a key divisive moment in modern Taiwanese identity.
It was a successful power grab, but at a staggering human cost.
An irreparable human and political cost.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to take away as you continue your revision. Considering the GMD brought their military and the entire national treasury with them, how absolutely essential was this successful but brutal consolidation of Taiwan for the GMD's ability to even survive as a political entity after losing the mainland? How crucial was it for them to function as a credible state? That's something for you to explore.
Use this deep dive to structure that understanding. You now have the context, the key events, and the motivations behind this really pivotal chapter.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.